Hey there viewers, welcome to the final installment in the engine timing series. This is part 4, and in this part we're going to take everything that we learned in parts 2 and 3 and a little bit of part 1 and put it all together and run through the timing procedure. I wanted to say a few things. First of all, people have been asking whether or not this procedure can be done in or out of the car, and of course it can. If you watched my timing fix video, you'd see me actually doing it in the car, which is where I learned how to do it. It's a lot easier with the engine out of the car, as you might imagine, for access, but with the engine in the car, it's totally doable. The biggest difference being that when you need to move the crankshaft, you have to do it using the flywheel versus going right to the back of the crankshaft like you can right now. Excuse me. So it's a lot easier, as you might imagine, with the engine on the stand. Additionally, I wanted to reiterate the importance of having your timing chain components and your timing gears in top condition before you even bother to time your engine. I haven't talked about it very much, but if your timing chain tension isn't set correctly, or if you're having any problems with your VVT gear, you shouldn't even bother to time your engine until you get those things fixed. Along those lines, I have just added a second link to a video of a couple of guys setting the timing chain tension on their 2.3 liter turbo engine. And it's a really good way for you to see how it's recommended to be done. Excuse me. So you can look for that. I think I put that in part number 3. Additionally, I learned from that same video that the sprockets on the turbo engines appear to be split. So in that case, you need 3 diamond-coated washers instead of the usual 1 or 2 for the naturally aspirated engines. These guys also managed to get their timing peg in the side of the block without taking the axle out. And I believe the way that they did that was by loosening the bracket that the half shaft mounts to and just pulling that away from the block enough so that they had the ability to get the timing peg in. So that's probably not a bad idea if it would save you from taking that half shaft out if you were doing the timing with the engine in the car. And I think that's it. So those are just a few things I wanted to mention before we get started. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and run through the procedure. We're going to run through verification. We're going to run through locking the timing down when everything is set and verified. And then we're going to go through the verification process one more time after we have everything locked down to make sure that nothing moved. So here we go. Step number 1 is to get the timing plate in the end of the camshafts. I wanted to mention that I usually, in the interest of time, have everything ready to go. So you always see me just putting my timing plate in with no problem, and that's because I did that ahead of time. But the way that I do that is by either using my 23mm wrench on the flat spots on either one of the 2 camshafts and turning them that way so that the slots in the end of the camshafts line up. Or I can put my crankshaft pulley bolt and my crankshaft pulley on and my bolt in and turn the entire engine over until the camshaft slots line up. So you have a choice there. I used the wrench. So let's see if I can get my timing plate in. And it slides right in. Next thing that we want to do is find top dead center. And do you recall me mentioning the rod that I used with a flag to help visually in the number 1 cylinder? And what that does is it just shows us the position of the piston along its travel between bottom and top dead center. So we can take our plug out of the side of the block now. And if you recall, I told you that the easiest way to get the timing peg in is to have the piston at bottom dead center on its way up to top dead center. And before we do that, we have a choice. We can either do that with the timing cover off or with the timing cover on. It really doesn't matter. Either way, you're going to find bottom and top dead center, and then we're going to go back and verify at the end anyway. So it's your personal preference. If you want to see the counterweight up against the peg, you can leave the cover off. If it doesn't matter to you, then the next logical step is to put your cover on, replace your seal, permatex your permatex your cover, and also this is the last chance you're going to have to get your diamond coated washers either behind the sprocket or behind and between the sprocket if you're doing a turbo engine. You can still get the final washer on after you put the cover on because the washer will fit through the cover. But if you don't want to forget, maybe now is the best time to do that. So we'll go ahead and put our cover on. I apologize, this is the third time I've run through this, and I'm kind of losing my voice a little bit. So we'll put our cover on. And now what we want to do is put our pulley bolt in so we can rotate the crankshaft. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it very loosely. And the reason I do it loosely is because if you watched my other videos, we know that the crankshaft is going to move away from the timing peg, and we want to minimize that. And this is particularly true if you're doing the timing in the car, because when you have to move the crankshaft using the flywheel, it's kind of a hassle because you're working underneath the car and sort of from behind, so you don't want to have to move the crankshaft very much if you don't have to. So this is loose, and now what I'm going to do is take my wrench, my ratchet, and I'm going to take the piston down to bottom dead center, and now it's on its way back up, so I can confidently put my timing peg in the block, tighten it down, and now I'm going to continue to rotate until we get to top dead center. And the crankshaft will simply stop, and also you'll be able to hear it. So let's see if we can hear it. There you go. Now what we want to do is take our bolt out, and we all know that at least we should know by now, that to some degree, whatever that might be, the crankshaft has moved away from top dead center. But that's okay, because we're going to go ahead and verify it before we lock everything down. Next step is to take our crankshaft pulley, put your washer on if you haven't done that already, and we're going to put it on. And now we're going to take our bolt. Again, this is just an M. The letter M as in Mary, M6 bolt. And we're going to put it through the hole in the pulley. And we're going to thread it into the opening in the timing cover. So now the pulley is indexed properly so that the 9th tooth is in the center of the crankshaft position sensor. Now what we want to do is take our crankshaft pulley bolt and loosely put it into the end of the crankshaft. And there's no need to tighten it here, so I've got it totally loose. Now the next step, if you all recall from part number 2, is to go back and verify TDC, because we probably moved away from it when we took the bolt out. So here we have choices. We can use a pry bar at the back of the crankshaft, and you recall that I told you that I've got two flywheel bolts in the end of the crankshaft, and I'm just using them as leveraging points to rotate the crankshaft. If you're doing this in the car, then you need to get back to top dead center using the flywheel, and you very simply use your screwdriver or pry bar, and you just sort of push up against the transmission housing and move the flywheel until you get back to top dead center. So I'm going to use my pry bar since the engine's out of the car. So for the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to move it away from top dead center and then back so that you can hear it. Okay. So now I'm wedged between one of the bolts and the end of the crankshaft. There's a protrusion where the pilot bearing goes, and I'm resting up against that. And so here we go. All right, I'm pretty sure you could hear that. So now we are 100% confident that we are back at top dead center. What I can do now is I can take my impact or my socket, and I'm just going to loosely hold the pulley, and I'm going to tighten the bolt down. All right, so that's it. The procedure, this part of the procedure is done. Camshaft, crankshaft, and pulley are timed, and the bolt is snugged down. So what I recommend doing at this point is taking all of your timing tools out. I guess there's some debate as to whether or not this particular step is necessary, but I think it's a good idea for multiple reasons. What we're going to do now is rotate the engine over a couple of times. You can do it 2 times, 4 times, it doesn't matter. What we're doing here is making sure that there's no mechanical interference between pistons and valves. And if for some reason your crankshaft moved enough, and this happened to me, which is why I'm encouraging you guys to do it, it's possible for the crankshaft to be out of position enough so that the piston hits one of the valves, and it happened. So I'm going to rotate the engine over a couple of times just to make sure that there's no mechanical interference. And that's it. We're good. Now if you follow this procedure, you won't have any problems, but there's a lot of peace of mind in doing this. So now is the verification step. Okay? We're going to take our timing peg and put it in. And I'm putting it in now because I know that my piston is at bottom dead center and on its way back up. I was watching as I was rotating it. Timing peg in. Now bring it to top dead center. And you should be able to hear it. And it wasn't very loud, so I'll back it off for you. And here we go. All right. Step number 2, get the timing plate in the end of the camshafts. It goes right in with no problem, which I have to admit is a great feeling. And now the final thing is whether or not your crank pulley is properly indexed, and if you can get the bolt through the pulley and into the cover, you're good. That means your pulley didn't move, and of course that means that your 9th tooth is lined up with your crank position sensor. So that's it. Timed, rotated, and verified. We're not done yet, and this is something that I haven't talked about in any of my videos yet. But this is actually the critical part of the, well, I guess the second critical part of the entire procedure, and that is locking everything down. If you recall, we've used friction washers, and the whole problem with this engine is that it's not keyed. So locking this timing in place by tightening this crank pulley bolt is absolutely essential and totally important. Okay? Can't skip this. The factory service manual recommends a 2-step process. I did it in 3 steps just because I was sort of learning. And I'm going to go ahead and recommend the 3-step process, but if you want to just go the 2-step, you shouldn't have any problems with that either. What I did was I first tightened the crankshaft pulley bolt down to 35 foot-pounds. And then I did 75 and then the additional quarter of a turn. I did 35 just because I wanted the peace of mind of knowing that I had locked the pulley down and everything else down without moving anything. And I did the first two steps. I did the 35 and the 75 with all of my timing tools in place. But the final tightening, the additional 90 degrees, I did with the timing tools out, and I'll show you that. So I don't have a torque wrench handy, so we're just going to use this, but you would be using a torque wrench for these next steps. And what I did was I took my torque wrench, I set it to 35 foot-pounds, and while I was just holding the pulley with my hand, I just tightened it down to 35, and it was quite easy, and we're probably not far from 35 right now after tightening with the impact. The next step is to take your torque wrench and tighten the pulley bolt to 75 foot-pounds. Now here you're going to need to hold the pulley. Now it may seem like you're just holding the pulley, but what you're actually doing is also in some way holding the crankshaft itself and keeping it from moving away from top dead center. Although, since you're rotating the crankshaft pulley bolt in the same direction that the crankshaft rotates up against top dead center, you're pretty safe in that regard. But really what we're doing is holding the pulley and preventing it from moving. Now I will say that while we don't want the pulley to move, if it should move a little bit, but our top dead center holds, we're still in good shape because this crankshaft sensor is slotted. So you have a little bit of leeway, but if you should let it move outside of the range of the sensor, then you're in trouble. You'll have to go back and loosen the bolt and line it up again. So we're going to be pretty careful to not let it move. Now the factory service manual says that you're supposed to use a pulley holder. You can make one or buy one commercially. I made this one, and it just has two bolts that are long enough to go through the webbing in the pulley and still allow me to hold it. So I'm going to go ahead and put the tool in, and what I'm going to do with the setup is I'm going to counteract the force of the torque, the force that I'm exerting with the torque wrench, by holding the bar against that force. So if this was a torque wrench, I'd be pushing down, and eventually when I got to 75 foot-pounds, you'd hear click, click, and then like most people, I would go back and do it again and click, click again, but whatever. Some people even don't trust their torque wrenches and go further than that. So that's the 75 foot-pounds. Now, nothing should have moved, and it probably won't. I was very pleasantly surprised to see that it really didn't take much to prevent the pulley from turning. So we've done 35 and now 75, and now it's time for us to do two things. We need to mark the crankshaft pulley bolt in such a way that we can keep track of its degree of rotation, and we need to take our timing tools out. You don't want to do this final step with the timing tools in. So take your bolt out of the pulley, take your peg out of the block, and take your timing plate out. Now here I want to talk to you about a couple of options that you have. If you watched my timing fix video, you saw that I used a bar like this to hold the pulley, and I also used a breaker, or I used a pry bar like this, but a short version, small screwdriver sized, wedged in the teeth of the flywheel up against the transmission housing to hold the crankshaft up against top dead center, or not up against, but at top dead center. So I did it two ways. So you may need a helper. If you're doing this with the engine on a stand like I am, you can just hold the pulley. If you want the additional peace of mind, you can have a helper. Use the pry bar on the back of the crankshaft. And some people go so far as to make jigs or fixtures to hold the flywheel, using the block itself as the point where they put a bolt in. Then alternatively, you could use a bar like this. Actually, this is the bar that I used, and I wedged it in between two of the bolts on the back of the crankshaft, and I put it on the ground under the leg of the hoist, and that held the crankshaft for me. So you have lots of choices, and everybody seems to want to do it a different way, which is fine. But I will be honest with you, and I found that holding the flywheel or holding the pulley was adequate. So even though I did the flywheel and the pulley, I think that if you're working alone, following the factory's recommendations of just holding the pulley is enough. So since I don't have a helper, and this is the tool that I have, I'm going to use this to hold the pulley. And now we're no longer using a torque wrench, we're using a breaker bar, probably with a, well, not with an extension, but yeah, you might need it actually to put a pipe on the end of the wrench here to get the additional leverage. But either way, we're going to hold the pulley, and we're going to tighten it the additional 90 degrees. And it's not as hard as it sounds, but you're definitely going to have to put some effort into it. So that's it. We went the additional 90 degrees. So in terms of the crankshaft pulley bolt tightening, that's it. 75 foot-pounds, and then the additional 90 degrees. You can do the 75 foot-pounds with the tools in place while you're holding the pulley, but for that additional 90 degrees, I recommend that you take the tools out. Some people will debate that, but given the risks, it's probably better to take those tools out. And you'll see here that on the timing plate it says, do the final tightening with the tools removed. There's risk of breaking your camshafts or your timing cover if you leave the tools in, and some people even report that you can break the block if you leave your timing peg in. But anyway, if you want to take an additional step, you can do the 35 foot-pounds before the 75, but that's entirely up to you. And now what we need to do, since we want to make sure that everything is still timed properly, is turn the engine over again. So there's one full rotation, no mechanical interference, and now we know that we're good to go. We still have to do our final verification, so we're going to take our timing peg and go to top dead center. And I'll make some racket for you here. So there we go. Next, timing plate. And this is one of the best sounds that you can hear if you struggled with timing. It goes right in with no problem. And then finally, to make sure that our pulley hasn't moved, we can do a visual inspection of the 9th tooth, or even better, put the bolt into the timing cover and it's perfect. 9th tooth is lined up. If it's a little bit off, adjust your crank position sensor. And that's it. And that's it, guys. That's the entire timing process. Crankshaft, camshaft, pulley, rotate to rule out any mechanical interference, go back, verify, tighten the pulley to 30 foot-pounds if you want to take an extra step with the timing tools in place, still with the timing tools in place, but while holding the pulley, do your 75 foot-pounds, take your timing tools out, that's my recommendation, some people leave them in, and then do your final 90-degree turn on the crankshaft pulley bolt to lock everything down. Rotate the engine over just to make sure That peace of mind is very nice to have. And then verify the timing one final time by putting your pulley bolt in, sliding your timing plate in the camshafts, and then making sure that your bolt goes through the pulley and you're timed properly with your crank position sensor. So that's it. I hope that this has been a helpful series to those of you who are struggling with timing or planning on doing timing, or actually for some of you who just wonder how the hell it all works. And that's pretty much where I was when I got ready to do my timing for the first time. Unfortunately, I watched somebody do it improperly, and it cost me quite a bit of time and energy wasted on trying to figure out what the problem was, when all along it was the timing. Once I realized that there were no good resources either online or on YouTube for how to do this, I made up my mind right then and there that I was going to make a series of videos to fill that void, and my hope is that I've done that. So anyway, thanks very much for watching. Let me know, if this has worked for you. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them, and we'll see you in the next video.